At some point, I came home from college and I told my parents, you know what? I don't really like accounting too much. I think I'm gonna go into journalism instead. And they're like, no, 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 no.
Sean, you weren't always this big fintech entrepreneur, publisher, influencer, business type of guy. Can you share your origin story with us?
Sure, yeah. So I got into the industry. I worked in fintech myself before it was even known as fintech. I got started in about 2006, shortly after I graduated college. And I was working for a startup company that was, we didn't even know what to call it. We were buying future credit card receivables of like restaurants and retail stores, essentially giving them access to capital when banks couldn't lend them money and doing it in a unique, innovative way. I started there as an underwriter. The company grew like exponentially. I worked my way up to running the entire underwriting department, and I did that for about 2 years. And then I moved over to the sales side of it, and then started brokering these transactions. And I did that for about 2 years as well. So I have about 4.5 years of working in the business under my belt. I got to see both sides of it, the risk side and the sales side, and I learned so much from doing both. And I was always, I was one of those people who would go online and I would try to learn more, right? I would look for the blogs, I wanted to go to the publications and see what other people were doing. And there just wasn't any of that stuff out there. And I thought, well, it's kind of a bummer. Like, I feel like this is like a story to be told. And so I started a blog, and while I worked in the field, I started writing about sort of my everyday experience, the things that I encountered, the problems, the ups and the downs and all that.
So was writing a passion of yours before you got into that industry?
It was. So I went to school for accounting and finance. I was a double major in accounting and finance. And at some point, I came home from college and I told my parents, you know what? I don't really like accounting too much. I think I'm gonna go into journalism instead. And they're like, no, 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 no. No, no, don't do that. Don't tell us that. Stick with what you got. Get the degrees, and then you can figure it out for yourself afterwards. And of course, I did that, and I went into finance, obviously, as I just mentioned. But I always had the love of writing, and when I started blogging about my experience in it, that passion just came back, and I felt telling the story of what I was doing was more fun than doing the finance work itself. So that's kind of my background in writing.
And how did you know if people were reading it? I mean, were people instantly engaged with the stuff you were putting out there?
So interestingly enough, they were. The industry was very, very small. We're talking at this point, it's like 2010. So this is 11 years ago, right? I think when people hear fintech, we're talking about the last 4, 5, 6 years, right? But this is over a decade ago. And from the very beginning, obviously, I wanted to get that feedback. If you write something, part of the joy of a writer is people liking it, right? Or enjoying it, sharing it, or telling you what they didn't like. Is getting that feedback. You don't want to just write and nobody reads it. So I did have analytics software from the very beginning. And because I was one of the very few people, if not the only person writing about these subjects, I got a lot of clicks from Google. And I could see in the analytics that people were reading it. And then that was reinforced when I would go out to happy hour. I live in New York, right? So I would go out to happy hours in New York, and I would mingle with other people from the business that I was in. And they would say that they read, some of the stuff I put out there, and they liked it, didn't like it, or it prompted a discussion. So people were reading it from the very beginning.
So, and this is 2010. So blogs were also more popular, I think, back then, just by virtue of there not being as many media outlets as there are now, for example. Because if you fast forward over the past 10 years, as you've grown deBanked, what started as maybe a blog and a writing style publication, you've over the years added elements to it, right? You've added a magazine for print distribution. You've added email for email newsletters. You've started doing events throughout North America that became extremely popular. You've also added your own TV channel, and started producing videos. So you've expanded sort of that range. How did you come about these decisions that resulted in the evolution of deBanked over the past 10 years?
That's a good question. I'm not one of those people who said, I really want to be an entrepreneur and I'm going to start a business someday. I just don't know what it is. It was more, for me, it was more about filling a void, something that should have existed that didn't exist that I thought I could do. And in the beginning, it was just about content that was related to an industry that was lacking in information. You could go online and you could find financial products. You could get a loan, you could search for a loan. But if you wanted to learn the ins and outs of how the business worked, if you wanted to become a lender, if you wanted to become a funder, if you wanted to become, a facilitator of these things, there was no information. So I was putting it out there. And because so many people were reading it, it attracted somebody who wanted to advertise on it. They said, our customers are reading it or our partners are reading it. And we'd kind of like to show, that we're, the big in the industry. And they're like, can we get our name on your blog? And I said, sure. I don't see why not. So we worked something out. They got a banner ad on the site. We came up with a price. We got them on there. And that started the flow. We had a few more do the same thing. I see this company on there. I see this company on there. Can I be on there as well? And it started to create a lot of work because I was still working in the business at the time. I was still selling business loans and factoring products and cash advance products and all that stuff. But on the side, I had to deal with I had customers who were like, you need to do more content. You need more content, all that other stuff. And I said, okay, well, I really got to get my name out there. And how else do I do that? And so one way of doing that was to go to industry events. Turns out there were no events. So I would have to go to kind of related ones. So I would have to go to payments shows. So payments has been around for a long time, right? Payments is a big industry. And there's been a lot of innovation in that world for a while. But the business itself has been around for a long, long time. So I would go to payments trade shows. And at first I would just tell people, you should go to my blog. Here's my business card, right?
Right.
And I would do that for the whole show. And I would go back and I would look at my analytics and I'm like, oh man, I'm going to have all these viewers. And I didn't have any. I had viewers, but it didn't increase as a result of going to the show and handing out my business card. And I said, what went wrong? And what I didn't realize was that people are going to these shows and they're getting a ton of business cards. They're getting a ton of swag. And I just got lost in the shuffle. I mean, telling someone to go to your blog at a trade show, not really a surefire way to get visitors to your site.
Right.
So I said, okay, well, what's my product? My product is a magazine, right? Or it's news, right? Maybe I should just give them this product physically give them the content. And then if they enjoy it, then they'll come to the site, right? So it's like, if I give them the content, they'll come rather than telling them to go to the site to get the content. And so I literally printed magazines. I didn't know how to do this, but I called up a printing press and said, turn my blog into a magazine. They were very helpful. And, lo and behold, I had this actual magazine, and the next trade show I went to, I just started handing them out to everybody for free.
Right.
It cost a lot of money to do, but guess what? People read it on the plane ride back, or they read it on the train ride back.
Sure.
And all of a sudden it brought in a lot of visitors. And that kind of created the impetus for it being like a real business, right? It attracted more advertising. It created a demand for more content. And although I like to write, I am very business minded. I do have that business background. I did work in the field for a few years, and I did have those degrees. And I thought to myself, I think this could be its own company. This doesn't have to be a blog. This is a business. Mm-hmm. There's no, I went to a payment show, but I should be going to a lending show. There is none, right? There should be information online about this industry. There is none. That's going to be me. There's trade magazines for everything, not this. I'm going to make that. I know how to make a magazine now. And a lot of it was learning along the way. So, I went from blogging to making a magazine. How does one do that? Honestly, you just figure it out, right? You start calling around. And it's the same for everything that we've done along the way. You mentioned that we expanded to events. Well, how do you go from that to events? I'm not an event planner. I've never planned an event. I couldn't even plan my own wedding. I had my wife did it. My wife did it, and we had a wedding planner. I was put in charge of the DJ, and I failed at that, right? So, but yet I'm hosting these massive events. So how did that happen? Well, you need to find the people that know how to do it, and you need to know how to market it. And so you kind of do it in increments. We started off by just doing small things. We did a golf outing, we did a happy hour, got our feet wet, and then we worked up a way to doing shows. And so that's kind of the evolution of how we got to where we are. You mentioned that we're doing videos and stuff now. It's the same thing, right? If you know that there's a need for something that's not being filled, I think about ways to fill that void. If you're an entrepreneur, you just figure it out. And a lot of times I'm not going to be the one who knows how to do it personally, or I know enough to find the person that knows how to do it. So that's how we got to where we are now.